habitats, especially in the tropical parts. I don't think we'll get it in 50 years. I don't think we will get it in 100 years or so. No way. Even if we have a beautiful history of increasing of people working on beetles in the New World, and I can tell that better for South America. So yes, about completing it, no way. Who's next?
Max. Max is next.
Yes, well, I would have to agree with Fernando that if you think of the next 50 years, if you think of the last 50 years, if you think of what has been achieved since 1970, there has been a significant amount of work. But in terms of an inroad into the total problem, anywhere in the world, I don't think we're likely to make a significant inroad in the next 50 years. Now, looking at the neotropical region, I'm invited here because I represent a very large global collection. And we have specimens from all over the world, and we have contact with scientists from all over the world. And it's certainly clear to me that out of biodiverse, hyper-biodiverse regions, the neotropical region, in terms of scientists and in terms of taxonomists, is ahead of most other very diverse regions. You've got a few places like Taiwan and Japan where you have a great deal of interest. But by and large, there's huge areas of tropical Africa and tropical Asia where there is very, very little internal taxonomy being done by inhabitants of the area. Whereas if you go to a country like Brazil or Mexico, you're going to find a large number of homegrown specialists. Now, as Fernando has said, a lot of that is focused on groups like Scarabaeidae and Cerambycidae, or Scarabaeinae, in fact, and Dynastainae, and certain groups of Cerambycids, and other groups even within the scarabs, like the Melanothines and the Aphodiines. I can't imagine any significant impact in the diversity being made in the next 40 or 50 years.
And now, Mike, what's your stance on this issue?
Sorry. Thanks, Mario and Vinicius, for inviting me. I was asked to specifically mention the state of affairs in North America, and I divided North America into 3 parts. Oh, I can't. I was going to share a screen, but I can't. Okay, so.
Oh, Mike, try again. I just enabled this option for all panelists.
What is happening here? Share screen. Here we go.
Oh, this technology.
Yes. Okay, so we can see this. So for North America, north of Mexico, the US and Canada, the fauna was reviewed as a whole back in 2003 when American Beetles was published. And there were a little over 25,000 species described at that time. 16 of those families had been revised since 1963, and every time something was revised, they went up on an average of 21%. So it's expected that the number of species will continue to go up, but relatively, probably less than 21%, but at least to around 30,000. So we have an amazing number of new species still to be described in North America, north of Mexico. And in fact, we have recently depended on a South American to come up and help us describe the Nearctic species. He actually arrived thinking that everything we had was described, and was quite surprised to learn that's not the case. So North America, north of Mexico is reasonably well off compared to the rest of the New World. we're still suffering from a lack of workers and a distribution of work. For the West Indies, it's a very undescribed fauna. Recent revisions shown here have changed the fauna from about 60% up to 1,500% whenever you, I'm not sure what the percentage is from 0 to 15, but the fauna is highly underdescribed even now. And if you look at what our expectations are, I predict that both Hispaniola and Cuba have 4,000 undescribed species still, or undescribed or unreported species still, based on the 2 islands and their area that have actually been pretty well documented. So the West Indies, we're a very long way from getting done. This region suffers from a lack of support for the workers that are there. There's not very many workers, and they're hampered by economic and political considerations. So they're very dependent on collaboration with outsiders, which I would encourage more people to help. It's a very nice place to work. Central America and Mexico are a bright spot. Mexico has been producing unbelievably good work and very diverse work as well. They're really getting into the groups that are often ignored in many places. This piece of work on the staphylinids of Mexico has placed this huge family into a working knowledge, a working availability for local scientists that exists in very few places in the tropics. And it's a great resource. I use it consistently, and it works very, very well. So in terms of the outlook for North America, I'd say we will never get fully done, but we're working on it, and it gets better as you move north. It gets better as you move out into the islands. The mainland is still a hugely undescribed, undeveloped area, but we have massive, excellent infrastructure and colleagues working in Panama, in Guatemala, in Costa Rica, and in Mexico. Mexico especially is a bright spot in this area. That's my overview for that part. As for, do you want me to talk about well, I guess we're going to go on to other things. I have some comments to make about South America, but I think we'll wait for those.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this. I was originally asked to talk about what did I think about South America and the study of Coleoptera there. And so I really stopped and kind of thought about it. And I think our problem is that we have 3 isms that are holding us back and that have historically held us back, and that the current situation, and especially the availability of the internet and better transportation, is really helping them. And this historical problems have been nationalism, chauvinism, and insularity. And the problem is these have all banged up against each other. So there's a nationalism in that it's been hard to work in some countries if you aren't from that country. And in other countries, it's been chauvinistic refusal to collaborate with colleagues in a different country, to not make specimens or types available freely back and forth. And the insularity that has resulted in that is that people have tended to work in a relatively small area, which is available to them easily. So that basically means within a country that is an artificial area in terms of South America as a whole. So this is evidenced by the fact that when a revision is done, in my view, the first thing I do when I look at a revision is to see how many collections have been consulted. And if there's under 40, there's really a problem. There are massive collections of South American material all over the world, literally. and they very seldom get used in a good revision of things. So one of the things I think is a problem is that people tend to look at the big European museums as only having types, and they want to see the types. But if you've been to London or Paris or Berlin, you'll realize that types are a totally insignificant part of their collections in terms of the biodiversity and distribution information that is available there. And all of those specimens need to be mobilized and used for a revision. And then you have people in North America who borrow from Sao Paulo and from a couple of European collections, and everything else is only looking at North American collections. That's crazy. The Maracay collection, the Tucumán, Buenos Aires, Santiago, these are massive collections that are underutilized. So people are underutilizing the collections north to south, south to north. And we need to get out of that insularity and working with our own easily available collections and get more of this out. Because I think the revisions would all be much, much better if they accessed all the material. Some of these old collections are from areas that are totally urbanized and destroyed now. Who knows what's in there? And so that's my biggest thing. We work on diversity, and yet we're not using the diversity of our resources the way that we would be expected to as coleopterists. The other thing then is we work on diversity, but we ignore most of our diversity. I would say that there are 10 families that get 95% of the work done in South America. There are half of the families in South America, I could not find a single taxonomic work by a South American author. That is bizarre. And since all of the panelists here have worked on scarabeians, some of us more than others, I'd like to say that the amount of attention that some groups get is like, from a diversity standpoint, like only allowing white English-speaking males to do taxonomy. It's a bad use of diversity. We need to be looking at all of the families. I loved that Lyotid paper. That was great to see. We need to see a lot more diversity of work on various groups that are understudied. And there's a huge amount of understudied diversity out there. In the faunistic work that I've done, I've come to the conclusion that the average size of a beetle species in the neotropics is somewhere, depending on which one we're looking at, between 3.8 and 4.5 millimeters. That means half of the fauna is under 5 millimeters. And how many of those are in families that are getting a lot of work? So we are not really looking at the diversity of beetles when we look at the New World fauna. And it's true everywhere. It's true in my work. I'm as guilty as anyone, but then, as a white male, I'm guilty. So of not being diverse. But we need to be thinking more about diversity, both of workers, mobilizing the people who we need to do the work, and mobilizing those groups that need to be studied.
Okay,
that's
Mike,
my soapbox.
Mike, can you do us a favor? Can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Fernando. And then if you want to give an answer to that, we would very much appreciate your input, because Fernando is one of the top coleopterists in Brazil and for sure in South America. So it would be fair to hear from someone that does research in that area. And then after Fernando, we would like to hear from Max as well, because Max has interacted with people from all over the world, and certainly with lots of researchers from the New World, including South America. So you have the floor now, Fernando.
Okay, thank you. I was really happy with the points Mike arose, okay, on nationalism, chauvinism, insularity, leading to regional taxonomy, leading to incomplete revisions. Yes, you're completely right about that. And I think we have, I think I need to set some historical background. about what has happened in Brazil at the same time as globalization allowed us to exchange more specimens and more opinions and more information more freely. So I have some 30 years of visiting and talking to taxonomists and collections and things like that. I will give a very personal point of view of what I saw since the late 80s, when I began to try to understand literature and taxonomy. Well, in the late 80s, we had still in Brazil a very small community of professional Coleoptera taxonomists, and we had very little, but also older in age, quantity of amateur coleopterists. We still had private collections of Coleoptera in Brazil. We have almost no more, actually, and the professional community was very small. Okay, so in '92, that big conference was made in Rio about nature protection and all this kind of thing. And this led to more understanding about the need of protection and about the need of studying biodiversity. Probably because of a bunch of papers that have been signed by Brazil with other countries. From this conference on, we began a bunch of laws restricting circulation of specimens, and also after that restricting properties of private collections. So what we had there is that the possibility for, let's say, a kid begin to be interested by Coleoptera raised from the point a kid would begin working on beetles about 12 years old or so, and that this kid was not allowed to do that, and they began to be able to do anything similar to insect collections in university. This happened during the 90s, okay? So at the same time, and during all this time, very few new places have been opened in the 90s for coleopterists. Actually, it began a huge need for biodiversity study, and a huge need for biodiversity studies call for a huge need for identifications, and then call for a huge need for formation of new taxonomists. But at the same time, any private attempt to approach taxonomy was there began not to be allowed as it is traditionally, like Max mentioned, at Japan, Taiwan, or in most of Europe. So what we got was that we had very few professional coleopterists, and the amateur coleopterist community practically died in that time. So after that, a new government program came in the very late 90s, beginning of the 2000s, to maximize universities, to make universities bigger. And so thanks to that, many people that were not employed but had done some studies on Coleoptera was finally employed. And we had a graduate program, a general graduate, federal program for growing up graduate programs in Brazil that permitted graduate programs in zoology and other areas to grow. Thanks to that, after all this, I would say those bad times, we had very few professionals and no amateurs at all. We began to have many students and many professionals. And what we have now is a huge quantity of students, but the growing of the university system has not continued. It's no more growing as it was before. So we need to think in several aspects about that. One of them is that we have huge collections and we have very good people presently working on Coleoptera and on those collections that are well connected to the international Coleoptera community. But at the same time, we have legal problems about sharing specimens. As well, most of you are aware that now it's being more and more difficult to send specimens abroad and to continue any scientific collaboration with people from abroad. So yes, and I would say that at least for Brazil, the present problem related to nationalism, chauvinism, and insularity is to be the one to be blamed are the laws that were made with the best possible intentions of protecting biodiversity and countries that had biodiversity. So I think someone can continue on. I'm not sure if I was understood, or maybe with smaller questions, I can explain some of the things I may have said that were not clear.
No, I think you were pretty clear here. And I would like to hear, we would like to hear from Max now. What is your perspective?
Just one second, Mac, if I could, Fernando, I'd like to clarify one thing. When I was talking about chauvinism, I was talking about the holdings in northern collections that wouldn't send types or make them and their material available for fear of the nationalism. This is not at all intended to be a one-way issue. This is very much.
No, I didn't interpret that as a one-way issue. Okay,
yeah,
not at all. You can be sure about that.
The thing is, it's also on a one-to-one basis. Some of the best interactions that any of us ever have in the North are with Latin American scientists, our colleagues. I mean, this is never personal.
Yes.
It's but I think we all have a vested interest in bringing it up and then trying to solve it. And I think what you just outlined was a brilliant summary of it. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
So, Max, if you could give us your input on this as a person who is constantly interacting with South American researchers and certainly a lot of Brazilians. So what is your input on this? Thank you so much, Fernando and Mike, for clarifying that.
Well, I found that very enlightening, but I have worked with Fernando over the years, and I visited Fernando in Cuiabá on 2 occasions. And I've worked with a number of other South American and Central American institutions over my time. And one of the problems that we have frequently encountered is not a personal problem, but a logistical problem. If somebody in Taiwan or in Japan or in Europe or even in Australia is working on a problem and I have some material in the collection in London which is relevant to the problem, I can put it in a box and send it out, and it can be with them in 4 or 5 days. And unfortunately, this is impossible with almost every neotropical country. And we've had situations in the past where things have gone missing in the mail. And so the institution has said, we can't send stuff by mail to this country. We can't send stuff by private couriers to this country. So we have this frustration that we want to make the material as available as possible, but there are logistical restrictions that are out of the control of the scientists of either country. And one of the ways that we've got around that is that when I go to the international meetings like the Entomological Society of America, I will bring dozens of loans for people in South and Central American countries and hand them to them, and they will carry them back to their countries. But this is only taking place once a year, and we've certainly felt the fact that it didn't happen this year because there are revisions being written in South American countries that don't have our material in them because we haven't been able to transmit the material. So it's a simple logistical problem, but very often it's expensive for somebody to come to London, to live in London, to travel to London. It's expensive for us to go to Brazil or to Peru or to Ecuador or whatever. And it's just not easy to transmit the material. I don't know, I don't have a solution to this problem. But what people should bear in mind, students who are working on neotropical groups, bear in mind that the big European collections, or certainly I can speak for London and probably some of the others as well, we want to be used, we want to be available, and we want people from biodiverse countries to use the material that's in the collection because that's what it's for. It's not our material, it's global material, and it needs to be made global.
And I think that what Ivie was originally asking is, we have been seeing over the years several revisions and reviews and publications from across different taxonomic groups, from several researchers from South America, several from Brazil as well. And I think his major criticism was towards the fact that most people only focus on the use of the type specimens that are deposited in those very important historical collections. And there's very few material that's incorporated from other important collections. For example, I have been here in the US with Mike for the past 5 years, and I've learned a lot that several North American collections hold extensive collections of specimens that were collected in South America. And some of our colleagues in South America are either not aware of that material or they're not contacting these people. So
the other thing that you'll notice, though, that I know that you have noticed, that Mario Cupello has noticed, Fernando has noticed, is that a lot of the stuff that we have is the stuff that you would consider to be rare. And the stuff that you consider to be common, we haven't got. Because our collection was made in 1805 in the surroundings of Rio de Janeiro or Buenos Aires. And that habitat has gone. So except for the fact that Alexander Fry picked up half a dozen Etucus and put them in his back pocket in 1860, that might be the only examples of the inhabitants of a particular environment that has disappeared. So in a sense, you go to an old collection, you're like going back in time and looking at your own country in the past.
Yes, no, don't take this as a criticism. What I'm saying is, in addition to that, I think that what Mike was saying is that most people, well, Mike is here, he can speak for himself, but I think what he was saying is that what we have been seeing is that people are only interested, or mostly interested in going to those big historical collections because of the historical material that's there. But also there's a lot of fresh material that are available in other smaller and less historical collections, if that's a word. So how would you guys, you, Mike, and Fernando, would mitigate this problem? I mean, because just like the London collection would like to be used, I'm pretty sure that the other smaller universities in Brazil, for example, or in Peru or Colombia or Panama, they also would like to be contacted, and their specimens, I'm pretty sure that they would like to be So how do we mitigate this problem of people not using that material that's also there in other smaller collections? What do you guys propose about this? So everybody can benefit from each other's collection, and we have a better review and revisions.
I think the main point here is that our main need in South America is to be able to identify specimens, okay? And thanks to that and to the huge quantity of specimens we cannot identify, and to the huge quantity of species described long ago that we cannot easily identify through original descriptions. That is the main reason. The first thing we usually look for are types. Anyway, this is the major point, I think. If we have money for either go to see historical collections with types, or go to see material assembled later that was not worked, the number one thing to do is to look for the types. And usually we do not have money to do all those things, or we do not have time to do all those things. One other point that is important here too is that, at least for Brazil, the graduate programs in Brazil have very short times for graduation, and this is probably also related to the question of giving priority to look for types than to look for more material. Anyway, one other important point, and this is just for you to see that our stupid legislation is not necessarily the most recent one. If we follow strictly as they are being interpreted lately, if we follow strictly our laws, we have a law of 1967 that states that specimens of new species collected in Brazil, the type and half of the paratypes must be returned. So you can imagine the quantity of collecting that was done in Brazil, for instance, in the late 60s and during the 70s, where collecting was allowed, of which specimens are scattered among other collections now. And I'm not saying this law is correct. This law is completely stupid. But we are supposed to repatriate part of this material if we want to study it. So we also have a legal problem when dealing with material from Brazil, especially collected during the late 60s till the late 80s, beginning of the 90s. So yes, it is not easy. And the problem is that most of our researchers are public employees. And many of them are federal public employees. And as such, we really have a nightmare, or we have nightmares each time we think about that specimen collected by someone in 71 that is in that place in North America. How do I tell the curator it must be repatriated if I am to describe it? Oh, no problem. So I describe it and I let the type there. Okay, now I am a public employee that committed a felony. I made several like that. So yes,
we have say that publicly.
Oh, sorry, I forgot there were 165 people listening. Sorry. Okay, anyway, you can cut it later. Okay, so that's one more of our problems. And with that, we raised an entire generation. And yes, now I am pointing to all or most of you that are doing your masters, that are doing your PhDs in Brazil right now. I am pointing on you now that we made a huge generation of entomologists, of taxonomists that are not only in many times they are not only against collections, they are against the existence of Brazilian stuff in foreign collections. That's what I was talking when I told to Mike. I was not interpreting. He was talking about chauvinism. Yes, we have this problem, and it's a big problem. And sometimes we have panel discussions in congresses in Brazil where you cannot convince a colleague, sometimes even someone with a professorship in a federal university or something like this, that if you went to France or to England and you saw that type, why didn't you bring it here? It belongs to Brazil. No, it don't. It doesn't. Well, okay. For the next one.
Wow, that was an amazing speech.
Sorry.
And, you know, I appreciate the honesty of it. I'm in a unique situation in that we're in a collection that refuses to keep holotypes because they're just a problem. So for us, it's fine to send them back to their home country because that's fine with me. But if you're in a large collection where you have rules of property and such, you can't risk that. And so everybody's viewpoint has to get taken into consideration. And I think you've covered that very well.
Sorry, about 2 years ago, I sent a parcel to a colleague in a US university with donation of several doublets, and he had to send it back because it lacked some permit. And I sent it before the new laws. Now it's worst.
Yeah. A couple of things that, you know, in terms of diversifying the taxa that are covered, you were talking about having huge collections. And one of the things that I have made a personal goal is to train people as general coleopterists so that they can recognize a broad diversity of taxa. And Max being on here is a world leader in that particular area as well. And one of the things that I do see that's lacking, and I've been talking about working on this for a long time, and I've failed to finish it, is just things that are keys to the obscure families, keys to the families. As far as I can tell, there is nothing but Lawrence's CD that covers all of the families for all of South America. And being able to take new students into the unsorted material in the various museums in every federal university and museum in Brazil and Peru and Argentina, and getting them to sort all the little obscure things to family so that they become available and they get exposed to them.
Which way round is that problem? You seem to imply that the lack of literature is the reason for the lack of interest, but it could equally be that the lack of interest is the reason for the lack of literature.
Well, I think that the literature drives the interest in the obscure, in that I know that people of my generation had Arnett's Beetles of the United States available. And when we got a beetle, we didn't know what it was. We could key it out to something. And every so often, someone would find something that they could get a name on. And when they got a name on it and they started reading about it, they got more and more interested in it. And so
that's where we're very lucky, of course, because the collection is so comprehensive in London. We don't really need the literature. We just go to the collection.
But if you're at a small university in northeastern Brazil, where you don't have that comprehensive thing, but you have a large collection maybe of unsorted material. So I
But
think
the
that's
internet
something.
is coming to fill that gap very quickly.
Yes.
You can get
Well, I
things
do think-
identified. You know, just put it on a Facebook group and somebody will tell you what it is and why it is that, instead of
get me
taking it
going
through
on
Lawrence's key or something.
Yeah. And then so getting that solved. And then the other thing is in this problem of logistics and this problem of legality, I would like to suggest the idea that when people are going from a place where they have trouble receiving material, either for logistic reasons or legal reasons, they put out a broad request for material for loans that goes to some place that's neutral, a Switzerland collection, let's say, in a place that's not all that expensive to work. And then that researcher goes and visits that laboratory for quite a while and studies that material. We have been happy to do this here, where people have stayed in our downstairs bedroom for weeks and studied material that was sent on loan here that they couldn't get in their home institution. I would like to propose that be more common and thought of. And the other thing is, people who need this should not hold back requesting it, because I think most colleagues are happy to make that happen when they know that it's needed. And no one is ever looked down on for making that request. And for the 165 people, or we're down to 157 because I'm talking, out there, I mean, think innovatively about getting at all of that material from various places, solving the logistics and such as cheaply as possible. I'm sure that this is something that many collections would be happy to do and to make it work. And many colleagues would be happy to host people, even if they're not in the group that they're working on. So it's an idea.
A similar model to that we've been using various meetings in North America and in Prague and so on to transmit specimens to countries that we won't post to. Like, we don't post to Russia or China, but we'll send it to Prague, and then somebody will come from Russia or China and go through Prague and take it back. And we could do with having more places in the new world like that.
Yeah, we need to found the places. That's the point, I think. The idea is great. Switzerland for beetle studies is really great, but I cannot think of one place that could suit for everybody or for almost everybody. I mean, I can understand maybe as Mike proposed, he has been doing that there. I think it's okay. But if I'm thinking about a Brazilian guy living in São Paulo or Rio, it would be okay. Not quite impossible right now right now, of course not, but not quite impossible to go to North America doing that. But for instance, last time I tried to go to Canada, and Canada is a friend country. It's not difficult to get a visa at all. I couldn't, because I live 2,000 kilometers from an embassy or from a consulate, and they put my interview for something like the day before the ticket that was already bought. So in Europe, it's easier for a Brazilian. A Brazilian doesn't need a visa to go to Europe. But right now, for Canada and the US, it's not so friendly. So I don't know where would be this kind of place. Because in Europe, it's far. In Canada or the US, it's not so easy. Well, I don't know. Just thinking about if we could try to do some international area. No, I'm not supposed to do that. Sorry. But Mike's idea is a very good one. The thing is to find the place that will suit for everybody.
Well, I don't think everybody would have the same solution. I think we need to
Yeah.
be diverse.
Mario, do you want to step in for?
Yeah,
Mario?
I would ask Fernando, why not trying to improve things here in Brazil? Trying to make the laws more friendly to us.
Okay, we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Okay. Some years ago, when they were working on the laws on the civil code in Brazil, we realized, and by we I mean a group of entomologists that included some old amateur entomologists. We realized that a good way was to work with our senators that were doing our new version of the civil code, because that was the place where the penalties for crimes related to collecting and having collections were placed on. So in that time, I went twice to the Brazilian Senate to have meetings about that. And I didn't have then a good experience. I was completely disarmed by a very intelligent senator that told me, Professor, I see you are a scientist, so I already understand you will advocate for the freedom of science and telling that science is international. However, I am a senator of the Republic and I am here to protect national interests. So I wasn't able. Anyway, one other place that we used to have about that, and this can be talked to, I saw that Luciane Marinoni will have some talk later, or it was before, I'm not sure. It's
Friday.
not
Friday.
on Friday, okay. For some time, the Brazilian Society of Zoology had a seat in the National Environmental Council. This council is not a deliberative council. It's just a consultative council for the Ministry of Environment. However, few months ago, or about a year or so ago, I do not remember, this council was dismantled and all scientific representation in the National Environment Council was taken out of the National Environment Council. I think that the institution that still has some power enough to go directly to ministries, is the Brazilian Society for the Advancement of Science, SBPC. And so this is maybe the way to work that from inside. Maybe next person occupying the Ministry of Environment will resize the National Environmental Council to have scientists. But right now, we do not. And I think that one good strategy, and I already talked about that to Vinicius some time ago, is that if we have more support for our scientific societies grow a bit in terms of associates, and then have more power to ask for political decisions or for seats in this kind of councils. Okay, so if you want to help with that, support the Sociedade Brasileira para o Progresso da Ciência and its affiliates, including the Brazilian Society of Zoology. The Brazilian Society of Entomology is also an affiliate. The Entomological Society of Brazil is also an associate. There is a forum of zoology-related societies of Brazil that is headed by the Brazilian Society of Zoology. So that maybe it's a good thing to try to talk to Luciani on Friday to see what can be done about that, because it will be, undoubtedly, it will be through our societies, because they represent, or they should represent, us.
Yes, I think you're right. And we also invited the Sociedade Brasileira de Entomologia to be here on Friday. I don't know if they will be here or not, but we are still waiting for their reply. I hope they will be here. So let us change a little bit the subject. We are talking about now things that are preventing us from discovering, from exploring the diversity of Coleoptera in the New World. But the most fundamental question is, what is still to be discovered? What are the things that are there to be discovered? A very common criticism about us, about the Coleoptera community in Brazil, is that 70% of Coleoptera taxonomists in Brazil work on scarabs. Is this a fair criticism or not? Or is this something of pride for you, Fernando? But please, this question is also for Max and Mike.
You have to add cerambycids.
Yeah. I think more in the
my
past.
experience.
More in the past, yeah.
Looking at the British fauna, and the British fauna is probably one of the only faunas in the world which is almost completely delimited. We have 4,132 species of Coleoptera. In my lifetime, there have been about 3 or 4 new species described from our fauna, and that took about 250 years to do. And if you look at the history of the discovery of British Coleoptera, people were working on Lepidoptera, they were working on birds, then they were working on Lepidoptera, then when they got bored of Lepidoptera, they started working on scarabs and cerambycids. And then when they didn't get any new scarabs and cerambycids, they started working on other groups of Coleoptera. So as long as the scarabs and the cerambycids are still continuing to produce novelties, people are not going to move on down the ladder to the next group. I think that probably the same pattern.
We have another thing for neotropical fauna too. And speaking of scarabs, is that scarabs are used for monitoring biodiversity, for measuring biodiversity, for surrogates, for groups that are more expensive to sample. So this generates a huge need for scarab identification. And for scarabs, I'm talking about dung beetles, sorry. Okay, let's say dung beetles are not my favorite group, I swear. My favorite group is Geotropidae. But all we have been doing on dung beetles is because I feel pressed by my friends who work on dung beetle ecology to make it possible to identify our dung beetles. So it's not bad. Actually, it's very good, because with this, can use dung beetle diversity as surrogate to estimate futurely other diversity of other groups of scarabs, and to point out interesting places for work using dung beetles as surrogates, as we also do with butterflies. Okay? So, yes.
Can I step in just for one quick comment? So I just want to know, how does this relate to the actual question? Like, for example, how is this going to affect how are people going to study I don't know, some Elateroidea obscure family that nobody have ever worked in the past, and there's plenty of material in collections. Like, for example, Fingotide, for which we have Andre Rosa working with the group right now. But like, there's plenty of stuff to be done in this group. So, like, how does this relate to the obscure and poorly worked groups?
I see two ways there. One of them is that when even right now, for instance, we sample dung beetles with pitfall traps, baited pitfall traps, but we are beginning to sample dung beetles with other kinds of traps that take lots and lots and lots of other stuff. Okay, so we presently have a huge amount of known dung beetle specimens collected in dung beetle inventories. And please, I'm not talking only about Leiodids, Hysterids, and Staphylinids. Those go to pitfall traps. But when we put flight interception traps, and most interesting, when we associate with dipterists and hymenopterists who do malaise traps and begin to trap for ecology, using modified malaise traps that serve at the same time as normal malaise traps and classical flight interception traps, then we begin to sample an enormous amount of material. So this material is here. This is point one. Point two, about how to make people work on other groups. Well, I had the happy experience some time ago of having a student who decided when she finished her master's, I will no more work on dung beetles. There are many people in dung beetles. Let us look for another group. And thanks to her previous formation using dung beetles, she was formed enough to work well on another group. And that's what she's doing right now. Okay? So I think we have both things. First, if we do not use only boring baited pitfall traps, baited pitfall traps are for people who want to collect always the same things, and to think they are good for sampling biodiversity surrogates. I'm not so sure baited pitfall traps are good for using dung beetles as biodiversity surrogates. Okay. Anyway, we have also that huge amount of new material, and second, a person who was formed with one group of coleoptera is able to shift to another group and will even feel, oh, I am more experienced now. Maybe it's time to get to touch that group that nobody touches since peak. Morphology doesn't change so much about that. So, and let me take a hook from what Jorge Noriega asked in questions about potential conflicts between ecologists and taxonomists. It's always posed in Latin American meetings on scarabioidology because we are full of dung beetle ecologists and with dung beetle taxonomists too. And we have a conflict of interest. Ecologists want to answer ecological questions using dung beetles. And dung beetle taxonomists want new species of dung beetles or interesting species of dung beetles, and not those boring things taken in baited pitfall traps. So the thing is that there is a conflict of interest, and this conflict of interest is solved through collaboration. Ecologists work a bit more in order to have collections presentable to make taxonomical work easy, and this is good for taxonomists. Taxonomists put a bit more work on trying to identify this material fast, and they can receive as gifts from those ecologists the remaining material they collect that they will not use in their ecological work, that will grow up the collection, including in other groups. We have very good experience working associated with some of the main Brazilian dung beetle ecologists. I've had very good experiences with some colleagues from Colombia, including Jorge Noriega, and I've had very good experiences in Mexico too about this, putting ecologists and taxonomists to work in collaboration, but having in mind that they have different aims. And it's the same thing. We put those modified malaise traps, we collect your lizards too. We have now a huge Amazon project where we are working on about 90 different localities in 12 different interfluvia. And I put as a condition sine qua non for my colleagues, ecologists, if you also put flight interception traps, then I will identify your baited pitfalls curves. And it's okay, it's working, and all Coleoptera are coming here, including those from Malaysia.
I'm on my way.
Mike, just a second, just to remind all of us, so we are still talking about.
Sorry.
No, that was very enlightening, and I mean, I think a lot of people have been asking those questions, and I think it makes a lot of sense after your explanation. So you're using that as a good strategy to form new people in a group for which you have a good set of resources, and then people are going to be trained to be free and work in other more complex or less documented groups. So I think it's good that you put that out, so now people understand it. Go ahead.
The ecologist versus systematist issue is something that I've also struggled with a lot, and I finally figured out that if you just take your basic species abundance curve, ecologists need the left half of that curve because there's enough numbers to do statistics, and all we care about is the right half of the curve where the rare things are, and they're absolutely worthless to the ecologists in spite of, but we can sometimes find things in that right-hand curve that are very ecologically interesting and find out how to collect them in numbers that the ecologists can use. And if we think about what each other's needs are, we can get along pretty well. But when we just are off in our own corner, we're looking at completely different goals, and we need to think about how we can get the ecologists to look at the rare stuff that we're interested in by finding ways to get them. I mean, those flight intercept traps may well generate data that are in abundance that an ecologist can work with, but they don't know about it because they're concentrating on dung traps because that's what they already know. We just have to talk.
Can I make a small note, just because most of people assisting is probably in the Brazilian research system, so they must write projects for the Brazilian research system and everything. So we are now in a moment where funding is collapsing, really. We're losing funding for research. And when we lose funding for research, people that give the funds, begin to be more careful and to evaluate more funding research that show some kind of innovation. Okay, so I am a member of the zoology board in CNPq. I can tell that because I will be out of there next year, so it's okay to talk about. So when you submit a project for the Brazilian research main research foundation, that is CNPq, please take in mind there is a question there asking, will this project provide some innovative product or process? If you are doing taxonomy, it will. If you put an identification key in your report in the paper that came from your project, you are generating a product that is innovative enough to permit identification of portions of the biodiversity that were impossible to identify before. So please, and now I'm talking as an agronomist to a bunch of biologists, please evaluate your work. Put value in your work. You're doing things that are valuable. Tell people, thanks to the work I'm doing now, we will be able to put names in parts of our biodiversity we couldn't before. This is very important, and this raises your possibilities to get funded when we are short of money.
Now, the one question I would ask, which is related to a shortage of money, what we've been doing in Europe for generations is relying on amateurs to do the work that several generations ago the professionals would have done. Now, it seems that if the Brazilian authorities are wanting to cut money to science, they should be encouraging amateurs rather than forbidding them. So if you've got people who want to do the work for nothing and you actually make it illegal, what is the benefit of that to anybody? Do we know?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, your senator says that you shouldn't be collaborating with foreigners because they're foreigners, but the amateurs are not foreigners; they're Brazilians as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I would like. This is a really interesting conversation. I would just like that we should start finishing up this, and I have one final question here because we have been up for an hour and a half. So this big question is: Mario is still not online. His connection is not good, so it would just be me for a little while. So my big final question here is, what are the most pressing questions still to be answered about the New World coleoptera fauna? Most importantly, what regions, taxa, and microhabitats, in your view, are likely to house most of the species that are yet to be discovered? So I would like to start with Max now, and then we go with Mike, and then at the last with Fernando. So do you want me to repeat the question or put this in the chat? So it's basically, what are the most pressing questions still to be answered about the New World beetle fauna? Like where should we be focusing our efforts to unravel the diversity and species discovery and all of that?
Well, I think that's more or less what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half, isn't it? That
Yes, but of course, we have been talking about lots of things, just like a summary of this, trying to finish up this and go towards the end of this conversation.
I mean, I wouldn't even be able to estimate what percentage of the Brazilian biodiversity fauna or the South American or neotropical biodiversity has already been described, but no doubt in almost every area of the neotropics, there are numerous new things to be found, even in the popular groups like Cerambycids and Scarabaeids, as has been amply demonstrated. And obviously a priority needs to be attached to areas that are likely to no longer exist in the same sense in a decade or 2 decades, compared to areas which are more likely to persist. But I think that in order to start answering this question, we need to more properly address the kind of questions that Fernando and Mike have been talking about before. I think we're getting down to, ideal world specifics. Is it better to go to this tree or that tree? Whereas the question is, how are you going to get anybody to go to any tree in a generation's time?
Yep. Mike, do you want to add something to that? Or what's your position on this?
I don't even know where to start. There isn't any well-known place. There isn't any well-known taxon in terms of really well-known. If we could get 20,000 amateurs with the idea to figure out what's within 5 kilometers of their house in Latin America, and they really worked on all the beetles right down to the tiny things, I wouldn't be surprised if the number of described species is in the 10% or less range.
I think
when I look at small things, when I look at colodioids or things like that, it's exciting to find something that's described. It's not exciting to find something new.
You look at that Jim McLaren in Ecuador, who is working on an area the size of this room, and everything he finds is new.
Yeah, so I think our issues are capacity in both institutions and personnel, and in broadening our appeal to a wider number of people, and then getting things as much as we can worked up so that people have an idea of these things as surrogates. When we did the synopsis of the Calidioines of the New World by genus and all of the, cataloged all the described species, we know that there are 10 times more species just in museums already than are in the list that we published. 10 times more. And that's just what Adam and Nathan and I have seen, and Ian. And we haven't seen everything that's out there, let alone what hasn't been collected. So where to go? Everywhere. And if you go to a place where, well, for instance, one of the stories that I have been dreaming of seeing someday is that there's 2,000 species of cerambycids supposedly collected at the base of the Christ statue above Rio. All right, I want to go up there and just suck up all the little tiny beetles that they're stepping on while they collect the cerambycids. There must be 100,000 species at the base of that statue if there are 2,000 cerambycids.
Even I've described something from that statue.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to visit that place at night with those lights on. I mean, that's one of my goals in life, is to go there. And I think it's even accessible in a wheelchair, but I just can't imagine what going around with an aspirator or a pooter and just sucking up stuff off the ground that's tiny would yield.
Look, I've been doing that there.
Have you?
When I was 10 years old. And I remember to collect interesting things and then go talk with Alvarenga, who was the guy who collected most old stuff there. And he was telling me, now this, we use it to find much more than that. And later, I've been talking to Monet, who has been collecting there later that, and he used it to do, now it's European fauna, not European species, but the word he used was that fauna is Europeized. You just have a bunch of common species, and that's all. And almost disappeared. But I don't know, maybe it's better. Those news are from 15 to 20 years ago.
I'll bet you every limnicid out there is new. I bet you every limnicid at that statue is new. I mean, all
Yes.
these little obscure things, they're all
Yes.
going to be new.
Yes, no. I'm completely sure.
So where to go? Wherever you can get to.
Yep.
Okay. What are the priorities? Do the work. Where is wherever you can get somebody to pay you to do it. And everywhere you go will be productive.
That's a really good piece of advice.
You took a very important point there. You told wherever you can get someone to pay you to do it. Okay? Now, begin to think about paying some of that yourself. And I'm talking to students who sometimes are not habitual. No, be paid. I'm talking is, it's not, you do not need to have a formal science project approved to do some good collecting. Do some good collecting in your vacations. Do some good collecting otherwise, not only with projects. If you want to begin to work on a group nobody did before, then do your garden. Begin with your garden. Do not think about going to the middle of nowhere for a group that is no that has no knowledge associated. If you know nothing, begin where you live. And when you begin to know more, you will need to go to go further to find other things. Anyway, if you have the possibility to collect in far places, collect everything, not only the things you work with, please.
So to answer Priscilla and Bruno here, when I say what I said, I don't mean to get it necessarily a grant to do pure science. I mean that your mother wants you to go to a place and visit your aunt. Collect there. Your husband wants to go on a vacation to Iguazu. Collect there. Anybody that's going, you want to go on a business trip for the bank you're working for to Brasilia. Collect there. Wherever you can get to, you will find new things. So if, you know, I tell my students that when it comes to funding, you have to be like the person on the street that, you know, I don't know what the Portuguese word is for panhandler, but the person on the street that walks up and asks you for change. Okay. You have to think like that. You have to look at the person with the money. You have to say, what do they want to hear in order to feel like they want to give me money? Then you have to say, what do I want to do that I can do while telling them what they want to hear? And that's your story. And that's the way you go about it. It is very, very dishonest sounding, but that's the way you do it. And it doesn't matter where you go, anywhere. If you are working on beetles in South America, or actually in Montana, anywhere you go, you can find something interesting that nobody's ever found there before, because 99% of the planet has never been visited by a beetle plant collector. Don't go back to the same place everybody else has been. Like, I want to go to the statue in Rio. Go to some place that no one's ever been. And there's so much to do. We don't have to worry about, our grandchildren don't have to worry about running out of things to collect that will be new. It's just going to be fun.
Well, I think that was a very interesting conversation. We had a lot of things to think about here, and I would like to thank each of you personally. Max, Mike, and Fernando, thank you so much for your time. I wish we could stay here for like 3 more hours, but I'm sure that people are already super tired of this marathon. And today's just the first day. We have 4 more days of Beetle Talks. And for those of you, the survivors, we have right now 120 people I hope to see you guys tomorrow. And for the panelists of today, thank you so much for your time and for everything you have done. This was a very fruitful discussion, and I truly appreciate all your efforts and your time and energy here. Mario, unfortunately, his internet died, so he won't be able to say his thanks to you today, but I'm sure he will send you a message in private later. If you have any final remarks that he would say, please feel free to do so now.
I just thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk with everybody. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll second that. That was fantastic.
Yes,
Very
yes,
nice.
I really liked it. And I forgot to thank for the invitation in the beginning, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. And now off to bed for you guys in England, and for you in Brazil. It's time for dinner. And for us here in Montana, it's also time for dinner. So
It's
I will
midnight
see
here. I
you.
had my dinner.
Okay. All right. So dinner for you as well.
That's
So,
why you're logging so much. I
no,
didn't.
for the rest of you, we will see you tomorrow. We will send you links for tomorrow's meeting as well, probably in the morning or later tonight. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for everything, and have a good night.
Well done. It's lovely to see you all.
Bye, thank you.
Nice to see you all. Bye-bye. Tchau, Fernando.
night.
Tchau.
Tchau, pessoal. Até a próxima e a gente se vê amanhã, tá bom? Um grande abraço a todos.